there is rarely a patch of dirt, an erected wall, or a lone tree in these United States of America that has not been touched by Kudzu, a viciously resilient vine imported from the Orient. It initially served a practical and aesthetic purpose for a small segment of the population. However, through reckless mismanagement, compacted by the misfortune of the Dark Ages, the plant grew and expanded out of control, tightening its grip over anything and everything it came across. While it's too late to save much of North America, the history of the kudzu serves as a reminder to those left over to never allow an outsider forced into one's home so readily, no matter how beneficial they may appear. For in time, they will all show their true intentions, which may not always be what you first think. Kudzu is a leguminous vine native to predominantly East and Southeast Asia. Its leaves consist of 3 leaflets, which resemble that of the common bean, though they are larger and the lobes of which are more angular and tougher. Kudzu blossoms typically bloom from July through September. They are elongated and colored an exquisite violet and purple, emitting a sweet, grape-like scent. The vine, being a legume, as expected, produces hairy seed-filled pods. However, these pod clusters usually contain only a few viable seeds, which can only germinate after lying in soggy soil for 5 to 7 days at a temperature of at least 68 degrees Fahrenheit. If these conditions are not immediately met, it is not a major issue, for these seeds can remain viable for many years, waiting for the perfect time to sprout their roots. This is in fact not the kudzu's typical form of reproduction, as it usually reproduces in one of 2 ways. In the first, the mother plant shoots off a horizontally growing stem-like structure called a stolon, or runner, from the plant's base, or the crown. The stolon runs along the surface of the ground and develops a bud nearby the mother plant, which then sprouts roots and leads to the development of a new daughter plant. The second method is very similar, with the mother plant's crown sprouting a rhizome, or a horizontally growing root-like structure that travels in the soil close to the surface and develops a nearby daughter plant. As the young plant grows, it needs constant moisture and as much sunlight as possible. Once matured, kudzu is incredibly resilient against many types of weather, but finds long growing seasons with plenty of rainfall most favorable. In ideal conditions, the vine can climb to heights of 70 feet or even more, growing an astounding 1 foot in a single day. It appears to be at its most fruitful along the edges of forests, which provide the plant with plenty of trees to climb, on top of plenty of sunlight. With the coming frost of winter, the vine sheds its leaves, leaving behind its bare brown and branch-like stems, a thick barbed wire blanket over the terrain. As the temperatures warm, the kudzu makes its triumphant return. While grown in much of Asia, we can focus on its reputation in Japan, from where its English name is derived. Known as Kudzu in Japanese, the humans of the Empire of the Sun have been successfully utilizing it in many ways. The very large roots, for one, are rich in starch, so master manufacturers have been digging out kudzu roots and turning them into a powdered starch form used in cooking for hundreds of years. It can be used as a thickener in soups and stews, and as a key ingredient in a selection of desserts, such as the chewy kudzu mochi and the red bean paste-filled manju. Dried kudzu roots have also been widely used as a versatile medicine that could treat anything from fevers and diarrhea to liver damage and even heart disease. Kudzu blossoms are also edible and can be turned into a burgundy-colored jelly that retains a delicate floral flavor and is very sweet. Kudzu leaves are also edible and can be consumed raw, though one may find there is a delicate process in selecting just the right leaves of perfect maturity, for a less expertised cultivator will find many would taste like cardboard. One might treat kudzu leaves much like one would spinach and incorporate it into one's culinary exploits with great pleasure. Evidently, practically all of the vine is edible and sports medicinal benefits. Humans aren't so greedy to keep the vine for themselves, of course, as in Japan it has been used to feed livestock to great effect. Grazing animals seem to enjoy the high starchiness of kudzu leaves and can feast on it in areas of limited pasture, such as steep hills and rocky land. Outside of being consumed for food, dried kudzu vines and runners are an excellent medium for crafting baskets and other weaved products. The vine also has been used for producing textiles and paper, similar to hemp. Perhaps it was for the betterment of humanity that such a utilitous plant ought not to be kept an Asian secret. In 1876, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania hosted the Centennial International Exhibition, the first world exposition held in the United States. The fair was attended by over 10 million fairgoers from nearly 40 countries and exhibited futuristic technical marvels such as a monorail, typewriter, and Alexander Graham Bell's telephone design. The exposition also introduced kudzu to the Western world as part of the Japanese pavilion on display. Here, it was presented as an ornamental vine covering the face of a property, with its strongly fragrant flowers attracting many eyes and noses. The vine had to be destroyed after the close of the exposition though, as per US law, but was seen again at the Japanese pavilion of the 1884 World Cotton Centennial Exposition in New Orleans, Louisiana. Not long after that, kudzu seeds were made available for purchase, advertised as a fast-growing porch adornment purely for aesthetic purposes. Rich planters along the east coast of the states slowly began integrating the vine into their porch installations, adding an air of exoticness to their homes, and training the kudzu to function as extra shade on those sweltering summer days. Up until the beginning of the 1900s, kudzu remained a mere shading ornament. That was until one Mr. C.E. Please, a professional photographer and farmer residing in Chipley, Florida, noted that the likes of horses and cows tended to readily munch on the vine's leaves on his property. By 1905, due to Please's vigorous campaigning and selling the plant via mail order, kudzu seeds and cuttings were being sold to farmers as an inexpensive forage alternative for livestock. The vine's yield and nutritional value were found to be comparable to the likes of alfalfa. As kudzu seeds were not adequately successful, alternative methods such as cuttings and transplanting well-rooted plants to a new field were far more favorable. In the first season after germination, the plant tended to fall victim to feasting rabbits, but evidently, the damage they inflicted was not enough to stop the vine from thriving. The relatively humid climate of the American Southeast best accommodated the plant, and it thrived for all the planters who lived there, an area expanding from Florida to Louisiana and reaching Virginia in the north. The vine was praised for its rapid growth and resilience, but its actual forage yield was deceptively low to moderate. It was further limited in reusability as it was difficult to harvest and bale due to its nature as a vine. But pretty soon, kudzu would find yet another way to be useful, one that would eventually lead it to falling out of favor with the Western world. Soil erosion is a type of land degradation that is essentially the gradual loss of the topsoil or the surface level land. It can be a naturally occurring phenomenon caused by numerous factors, such as prolonged wind and rain. It can also be man-made and was a significant enough problem in the US to demand a solution. In the American South, farmers for 200 years had preferred monocropping, that is, planting one specific type of crop in a plot of land for several consecutive seasons. This is opposed to polycultures, or growing multiple plants or crops simultaneously in the same field, or crop rotation, which is growing a set of different crops on a single plot of land sequentially, one per season. While monocropping leads to higher quantities of produce, is easier to manage, and desirable in areas in which the climate is best suited for a certain type of crop species, this practice drastically depletes the soil of nutrients and imbalances the soil's pH level. Having the soil host different types of plants helps rejuvenate the chemicals contained within, but monocropping causes the soil to degrade in health until eventually the topsoil erodes away, unable to stay together on the land, succumbing to the wind, rain, and tillage. By the 1930s, the South's persistent monocropping of cotton or tobacco led to the highly problematic malnourishment of the land. This insistence on relying on planting one type of crop, combined with poor farming practices throughout the Great Plains, compacted by a record period of drought in the 1930s, caused a long string of immense and damaging dust storms that are collectively known as the Dust Bowl. These storms decimated crops, destroyed infrastructure, and killed livestock and humans. Throughout the so-called Dirty 30s, government bodies devised ways in which to mitigate the excessive soil erosion which fueled these dust storms. One scheme pushed by the Soil Erosion Service was planting kudzu. Starting from 1935, the government agency pushed for farmers to plant the vine, as they deemed it, after some research, to possess numerous benefits. For one, the vine has the special ability to increase the level of nitrogen in the soil, thus rejuvenating it. Once the plant were harvested, the improved health of the land would boost the performance of the preceding crops that were to be planted in its place. Kudzu also served to halt the loss of soil on slopes and banks where the plant ought to hold a more permanent position. Areas of loose dirt on the sides of roads and on railway tracks were likewise fortified en masse with kudzu, which helped prevent the breakaway of the soil. The now renamed Soil Conservation Service was so convinced that kudzu would solve the nation's soil erosion woes that they offered landowners up to $8 per acre to plant it. That would be the equivalent of roughly $920 today. It is estimated that about 80 million seedlings were given out for planting by the end of the 1930s. The service was also joined by the Civilian Conservation Corps, which consisted of unemployed volunteers tasked with planting the plant all across the Southeast. As the South's destructive dust storms subsided and the crops grew taller, the populace rejoiced. The initial success of kudzu led to a rise in popularity in the early 1940s amongst all residents of the land, be they farmers or otherwise. Notably, famed Georgian farming columnist and radio show host Channing Cope advertised greatly of the benefits of kudzu, urging all who would listen to endorse and plant the vine on their own properties. Nicknamed the Kudzu Kid, Cope founded the Kudzu Club of America, a statewide group of avid kudzu aficionados who would be delivered their own seedlings for planting and in turn exchange tips, tricks, and undoubtedly stories of personal success. Cope's Kudzu Club was in fact one of several clubs in the Southeast that were dedicated to spreading the popularity of the vine. The miraculous savior of the South that was kudzu was also honored in the form of kudzu festivals. Beauty pageants were held, and kudzu kings and kudzu queens were crowned. The people truly believed that the vine was about to overtake cotton as the South's most important crop, and by the mid-1940s, the vine occupied an estimated 3 million acres. Unfortunately, kudzu's good reputation would soon come to an end. By the end of the 1940s, the plant that had been declared the savior of the South had become a nuisance. The seedlings that were planted to hold down the soil alongside embankments, slopes, roadsides, and railroad tracks had begun to spread out of control. While initially the kudzu grew at an acceptable rate, it was from the third year onward that the vine grew out its runners far and wide in all directions, taking hold of anything and everything in its path. Kudzu suffocated streetlight poles, street signs, climbed up power cables which caused outages, and knotted themselves betwixt railroad tracks, which led to some train accidents and delays. In these out-of-the-way places, there was no one there to manage its growth, and so it was free to do what it could do best: grow exceptionally fast. On top of this, farming practices had radically changed, especially in the aftermath of World War II. Gone were the days of manual labor, as manpower was being replaced with automation. Tractors, self-propelled combine harvesters, mechanical seeders and balers, and many other technological advancements minimized the importance of laborers and completely removed the role of horses and mules from farming altogether. Agricultural machinery indeed was a huge leap forward in productivity and output, but at the cost of cost. Not all traditional farmers could afford to automate their farms. In fact, farmers relocated to the cities in droves to find other more secure opportunities, abandoning their farmsteads. And on these abandoned lands, the kudzu quietly spread. In the idyllic conditions of the American Southeast, the vine could climb up hillsides and wrap around trees. Kudzu was seen enveloping trees entirely, stealing as much sunlight as possible, which caused the trees underneath its thick foliage to be shrouded in darkness and slowly die. Abandoned buildings and unkempt roads were likewise no match for the hungry vine. The plant seemed to be determined to reclaim the South for itself and reshape the land as kudzu country. This invasiveness of the plant in the United States starkly contrasted with the way it behaved in the East for several reasons. For instance, in Japan, from where the vine was originally brought over, it grew just as fast in the best conditions, but there were several naturally occurring foes which prevented it from becoming invasive. For one, there were over 100 different herbivorous insects in Japan that fed on kudzu, such as the kudzu bug, which kept its growth in check. The biodiversity in Japan was also significantly different from what grew stateside, which resulted in a fierce competition between kudzu and other plant species, constantly fighting for dominance. This conflict maintained a natural balance and hindered the vine from growing too powerful. In addition, there was significant genetic variety in the kudzu of Japan, allowing subspecies to peacefully coexist. Additionally, the Japanese had a long-established practice of harvesting kudzu for food, textiles, and medicines, hereby controlling its growth. Taking all these factors into account, kudzu was imported to the United States where it possessed no natural predators, and so could live and thrive happily. The careless and naive mismanagement of it only furthered its uncontrollable growth. After observing the damage it was causing, in 1953, the U.S. Department of Agriculture removed kudzu from its list of cover plants and soon called for the possession of seeds and seedlings to be outlawed. The government began organizing initiatives to combat and defeat the viney beast. But alas, that battle was not meant to be. June 4th, 1959, the date the Soviets launched their attack on the world. As the entire Earth was plunged into darkness, human beings had better things to do than manage some noxious weed. Society collapsed, and communities restructured. Starvation, chaos, rape, and pillage was the new way of life. Only after many years did some semblance of normality begin to return. By this point, the grandiose towers that cut through the sky had come to lose their shiny coat, and were nothing more than dusty and rusty gravestones, standing forgotten against the horizon. Masterfully crafted buildings of brick and stone, without anyone there to maintain them, had sprung leaks in their plumbing innards, and had begun to crumble and wither. The roads that traveled across the continent like the arteries and veins under America's skin had begun to crack and bulge and disintegrate. Nature finally began to take back what was rightfully hers and invaded the man-made cancers that riddled her landscape. Grass and weeds grew greener and taller than ever before, even where they were never meant to grow. New trees broke through the pavement. The skies became cleaner and bluer, allowing for any and all plant life to flourish. This, of course, greatly aided that one unkempt vine. The kudzu took this chance to keep busy, growing out its tenderly runners into what used to be the civilized world, overtaking the abandoned metropoli foot by foot, crawling up buildings, street fixtures, and automobiles. They grew horizontally, wrapping themselves around power lines which no longer carried power, and vertically up streetlights, which had lost all their light. Smaller towns such as Washington, Georgia, Franklin, Texas, and Jefferson, North Carolina, among thousands of others, were completely overtaken. The vine steadily expanded its reach from the south and into the north, east, and west. Those who stayed were too preoccupied with fighting to survive to fight off Kudzu, and after some time, when they got a chance to take a breath and look around, learned to in fact love Kudzu. Much like their new predicament of darkness, the invasive plant became a new and permanent addition to their life, an addition that would come to reshape their culture. Throughout the 1960s, isolated communities across the South began introducing kudzu into their diets, for there was so much of it all around them. There were kudzu soups, kudzu-infused pies, kudzu salads, kudzu root teas, and of course, kudzu blossom jam, a much-loved delicacy for the younglings. By utilizing the vine so, the survivors of the Southeast had unknowingly taken up the traditions of the ancient Japanese. The Americans happened to devise new recipes and cooking methodologies as well, which resulted in the likes of kudzu blossom syrup, which could then be used as a sweetener for lemonades on those hot summer days. And so, the vine had, once again, evolved in utility over the course of its relatively short time in the States. From a simple porch ornament, to soil erosion preventer, to common nuisance, and now, a lifesaver to millions. The culinary landscape had now become much greener and starchier out of necessity. The re-establishment of the United States Postal Service in 1973 enabled more isolated communities to finally come to terms with the reality of their new world, to reach out to any loved ones far away, and to hear how other towns and cities were adapting. On the more lighthearted side, the people of each locale had the chance to share how they incorporated kudzu into their daily lives. Human beings could share their plight and stories of hardship and adaptation, while also finding solace that they were for assuredly not alone. In fact, much of the letters of the time were written on paper crafted out of kudzu fibers. It was not until the Great Reconnect of 1987 that the full scale of the kudzu invasion was truly understood. Since the attack of 1959, the vine continued to grow near uninterrupted for nearly 30 years, from 3.5 million acres to an astounding 16.4 million acres, managing to lay its roots in nearly every single state of mainland America. As it blanketed the landscape, it successfully annihilated much of the plant life that resided there before kudzu made its arrival. It smothered trees, suffocated grass, weeds, and flowers alike, and drastically reduced the population of the wildlife that depended on them. For example, the southern flying squirrel was rendered extinct by the early 1980s, while the gray squirrel, opossum, and chipmunk populations shrank significantly, all either mainly or partly due to kudzu overtaking their native habitats. Outside the US, it had even begun to leak into Mexico and parts of Canada as well, showing that kudzu could readily grow in more hot or cold climates, contrary to what was previously believed. In Europe, human beings have found clusters of kudzu scattered around Switzerland, Italy, West Germany, France, and Spain. How kudzu may have traveled there is now thought to have been via the wind and migrating animals such as birds and some flying insects. In Asian countries like China, Korea, and Japan, the vine's reach expanded only slightly, as its natural environment was well equipped to suppress it. Kudzu was found to have grown wildly across Melanesia, as well as Australia and New Zealand, with the locals helping to suppress the growth of the vine by consuming it and fashioning clothing out of its dried stems. With the most major cities around the world now gravely overtaken by nature, they largely stayed abandoned. However, the newly assembled governments all strove to salvage as much arable land as possible for the foundation of a prosperous future. In 1990, the figuratively misinterpreted U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, George Bush, enacted the National Land Reclamation Initiative with the aim of rejuvenating farming soil that had become populated with undesirable weeds and other vegetation. Fortunately, due to what was known from before the Dark Ages, kudzu reinvigorated the health of the soil, and so the USDA's primary focus was to clear the land that was seized by kudzu first, which would be followed by the planting of crops necessary for human sustenance. Since the plant grew most readily in the southern states, that was where the program focused. For sufficient annihilation of the vine, removing all the roots is not necessary, as they are very large, deep, and heavy. Many can reach as deep as 12 feet underground and can weigh anywhere between 200 and 400 pounds. Apart from the root's enormousness, it acts as storage for energy and cannot even sprout. What needs to be removed are the root crowns, which rest at or slightly below the soil's surface. One can see numerous sprouts originating from this one spot, so they are relatively easy to locate. Complete removal of root crowns from a single vine system is seen as the most thorough method of kudzu removal, though it is rather laborious, for they need to be manually cut with an axe or pruning shears. It is therefore the best way to remove the vine from small patches of land. A simpler but lengthy process is weekly mowing. Since the vine extensively lies near the ground, using a rotary mower can prove to be a challenge, but if the kudzu is mowed once per week during the summer months for several ongoing years, it will seriously hamper its ability to grow back. Occasional mowing or trimming will not stop the vine from regenerating. A third alternative is the use of sprayable herbicides. There are many types available, but can be harmful if prolongedly exposed to humans, so the use of these is best restrained to rural areas. If used, the affected land has to remain barren for at least 6 months before any new crops are planted. All three methodologies were carried out under the order of the USDA on a case-by-case basis to find the most appropriate and effective strategy for all targeted lands. Over a period of 10 years, the National Land Reclamation Initiative successfully removed 1.9 million acres of kudzu from farmland, leading to the planting of a wide variety of crops and vegetables, namely rice, potatoes, carrots, legumes of many kinds, and tomatoes, among many others, foregoing the long-standing southern tradition of raising cotton and tobacco. By doing so, residents of the United States successfully enriched their own lives and helped the entirety of Earth's population regain its footing after the Dark Ages. As for the kudzu that had overgrown into the cities, towns, suburbs, and other residential areas, there it lay, along with much of the other friends from nature that had come to encroach on the cemented lands. Volunteer work sporadically took place to clean up neighborhoods and regain some semblance of a normalcy from the days of old. But human beings have come to grow very fond of their leguminous companions and regularly hold local fairs celebrating the vine and consuming it in a variety of ways, as well as enriching their lives with kudzu-based consumable and wearable products. Books continue to be published on kudzu paper to help control the plant's reach. In forests and wooded areas, the vine roams free, steadily suffocating trees as it sees fit. Aside from the aforementioned landscapes, the kudzu situation remains tightly under control. That is until 2016, which saw the first and only extraterrestrial invasion of kudzu, when young vines were spotted in a greenhouse in Copernicus, likely brought to the moon with contaminated seedlings. The problematic vine was quickly dealt with, and there have not been any more reported outbreaks on either the moon or Mars. And so this is how the kudzu lies, a permanent fixture of Americana, an invader from the east that wormed its way into the locals' daily life, antagonizing them into submission and later acceptance. It also lies as a symbol of the America of the past, a land built for new migrants by migrants themselves. The fact that it is an outsider thriving so readily in an alien world serves as encouragement for humankind to keep moving forward. It remains all around us, constantly reminding us that, like kudzu, we are resilient, and we as a united power can conquer other lands, for we are forever destined to explore and thrive. While it may be too late to reclaim the United States, perhaps we must take this as a sign to make other lands our home.